So I don't like the NP01s or the Outset AX, kind of. These are the newer offerings from Vaxee, technically. It's just their old wired shapes made wireless, but also with some major internal improvements. Now for those who know, Vaxee has always had stupidly strong and quality built products, more specifically their mice. Now, upon dissecting my Outset AX, I discovered how insanely thick the walls of the mouse are, how much extra internal supports there are, the fact that they use separate PCBs for the sensor, side buttons and main clicks, which all make sense for like their top tier quality control and individually tweaking certain pieces before official production. But it does come at a cost. They stack all these internals more so into the center of the mouse. Keep in mind these mice are on the smaller side, so that means needing to compact everything instead of spreading out the weight. Hence why they'd feel heavier than what their advertised weight is. But let's actually dissect this. Now as I initially started talking about the Outset AX, we might as well kick it off from there. The AX is definitely a smaller ego, having a more stubbed look with a wide body and a shorter length, but also with a very aggressive hump leaning way towards the left side. The click height is really tall, even comparing it to the Thorn and the EC2. Showing off the base, we can see it has quite a few roundings that make it way more attractive and comfortable, especially on the pocket where your thumb goes. I've heard the shape is tailored for some hands, but mine definitely don't fall into that category. Relaxed clawing it was the better experience that I've had out of fingertip, palm and claw. The aggressive backlifts flare out creates this extra extension, basically that's supposed to be supportive, but it just creates discomfort. And even if I try and adapt, my hands do get fatigued. The clicks themselves are pretty light and snappy, and because of Vaxee's build quality there is very little wobble, which is a huge win. Thankfully enough, the pre-travel isn't half bad. On some occasions after spamming the clicks, I do tend to notice the lazier bounce back or reset of the click because of the bigger post-travel. The side buttons are pretty decent and also an okay size and position. They're a slight bit on the heavier side but with good tactility. The only issue that I noticed in use was if I click a bit too far forward or too far back, then it would be mushy and almost sounds like it claps back into the shell. The scroll wheel itself is also pretty decent and tactile, but holy crap is the middle mouse button heavy. Legit the heaviest I've ever used, and it's so annoying as I use it for a fair bit of things across the games I play. Next is going to be the NP01s, a mouse that has also been very hyped about, so I was super keen to try it. It's also a smaller mouse with a lanky build, having a longer body, a thin waist and a very low hump. The build does have an Ego-ish touch where the shape bends out like an Ego, but in this case it doesn't have the hump of an Ego, which is kind of interesting and not half bad at all. The click height is a smidge lower than the Outset AX, but still taller than something like the Sora V2 for example. The base shows us the same approach as the AX when it comes to the way the Ego bends outwards, only difference is in the narrowness of the NP01s. But if you look from the front comparing it to the AX, the sides slant in way more aggressively, which I really question. When I hold the mouse in whatever way, thumb does make contact, yes, but the shape forces it to only have a small bit of area to cling onto, as we do lose that extra stability from having a less aggressive or flattened side. For this shape I found claw and fingertip to be the better grip styles, where palm would force pressure on my ring and pinky finger joints, kind of forcing my pinky to splay out. The side buttons are on the more enjoyable side. They're long and thin with a nice and less muted sound and less mushy feel. But the same thing goes for when you click on the far front or the far back of the clicks, it will be a bit more muted and will tend to feel a bit more mushy, minus that weird clap back from the AX. The scroll wheel, once again, is just decent. Oddly enough, the NP01s does have a way heavier and more tactile scroll encoder, and it still has the same heavy middle mouse button. So overall, I really am not a fan of the shapes themselves. But I haven't even gotten into the internals yet, which are surprisingly insane. Vaxee has recently released their updates of firmware and also released their new 4K dongles. They were kind enough to send me the 4K version, which does have the mice and the 4K dongles included. The internals sport a 3395 sensor and a Pixart MCU. But the thing with the newer Vaxee mice is that they have two different modes, one being standard and the other being competitive. Think of it like having a car in normal and then pressing a button to swap it over into sport, but it does require a bit more fuel. The performance boost is quite noticeable, and that's the same case here, but at a cost of battery life. On standard and at 1kHz, the NP01s and the Outset AX come in at 2.40 milliseconds. Then on comp, at 2kHz, it comes in at 2.08 milliseconds, eventually ending it off on 4kHz comp mode at 1.9 milliseconds, which is not bad by any means, but a higher polling rate and comp mode you'd expect to see a better metric than the original G Pro X at 1kHz, being 1.19 milliseconds. But that's also to do with the company deciding not to use 0 millisecond debounce time, which does add a bit of latency to the clicks for double clicking reasons, I would assume. But even so, there is quite a bit to say about the motion latency on these two mice. I can't show the metrics, but genuinely you can instantly feel when comp mode gets activated. It's honestly insane how much of a difference it makes in the aiming consistency, and that's without motion sync. The battery life is around 100 hours, so if you use it on standard mode without any polling rate changes above 1000 Hz, which is honestly pointless as majority of us will use the 4K version at the highest performance our computers can push out. So on comp mode at 4K Hz, we will see averages around 35 hours, which is still quite a lot. Now to conclude or summarize my final thoughts, Vaxee's tech, the quality and also the stability is really on their products. But I feel for them to compete in this rapid growing scene of competitive mice brands, they do have quite a bit to work on. I'd love to see a simpler internal structure, a smaller battery, less dense walls in their shells, better clicks and mush prevention, lighter scroll wheel clicks, and lastly, in my opinion, just better shapes overall. I do feel they are perfectly capable of doing so. They have a lot going for them and a very religious fan base that would be so keen to see improvements. Thanks to Vaxee for sending out these mice, and thanks to you guys for watching. Take care and peace.